But also we spend billions of dollars on education. At the state and federal level, according to The Australian, they did these numbers today, we spend $44 billion every single year educating the future of the country. In the past 15 years, that's $662 billion. Now, of course, we're about to spend, $300 billion on submarines that'll arrive in the next 20, 30, 70 years. But seriously, look at that number. For $662 billion over the past 15 years, what have we got? Well, a national disgrace. It should have set off fire alarms for every parent, every grandparent, every citizen in the country that, as you would know by now, that 1 in 3 students in Australia is not meeting the basic NAPLAN standards. Now, these are the standards about literacy and numeracy, which are measured in Year 3, Year 5 and also again in Year 9. Now, amazingly, Australian students are now twice as likely to fail than excel in maths and English. It's shocking results that continue a long-term decline in educational outcomes. The 2023 NAPLAN testing has identified 130,000 students requiring additional support to keep up with their classmates. That's more kids than there are seats in the MCG, with $44 billion being spent on education. The staggering statistics show that 430,000 of the 1.3 million students who sat NAPLAN this year, and remember, it's not every year, it's Year 5, it's Year 9 and it's Year 3, are performing below expectations. Only 15% of roughly 200,000 students, or I should say about 200,000 students, performed above the expected standard. 1 in 3 are not up to the most basic of standards. And you know the standards that apply in 2023 are not even the standards that were there in the year 2000, let alone 1990, 1980, 1970 or even earlier than that. We've come up with new ways to guarantee that while kids are failing, we don't declare that they're failing, they're developing. And we have a curriculum that has moved as far away from the basics as humanly possible. Because, of course, the point for many in education is indoctrination when it comes to a worldview as opposed to the basic skills and the ability to make decisions for yourself. Now, you would think that something as serious as this, when a third of students, and remember it's a random sample, not of all 13 years at school, but just a few years at school, and it's telling us this problem, particularly in regional areas, you would think that this would have seen an emergency response from government. But of course the Prime Minister, well, nothing from him today, literally no appearances anywhere in the media. The premiers who, when it comes to elections, turn up to schools to say that they're the one to trust because I'll spend more than the other person will spend on education, yet they too, as best as we could see, no appearances anywhere in the media today. Now remember, these were the people who decided to tell our kids that they didn't have to physically go to school for a couple of years because, of course, of COVID-19. Now, I will never forgive any politician, any bureaucrat, any teachers' union who believed that schools should remain closed. The evidence was there from day one. The kids weren't the problem. The older, the infirmed, the fat blokes and the smokers. We were going to be the problem when it came to COVID-19, not the kids. Yet instead we had the absurdity that even after 2 years of on and off again schooling, that we had the Teachers Union in Queensland delay the return to school by a couple of weeks for 1 year because they were too busy bitching and moaning about the protections that they would have against COVID-19. Now, this is a very serious thing that happened today. Australia's education system is stuffed. But most of the people who are in a position to make a decision about this, well, they don't quite notice. Why? Because they send their kids to private schools. And good luck to any and everyone who's watching us right now who's got kids or grandkids in private schools. But the reality is that the extreme majority of Australians can't afford $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 or even $30,000 a year, like it is for some kids to go to private schools. I was lucky enough to be at a Christian school in Brisbane a couple of days ago, a phenomenal school where the discipline was so obvious. And it reminded me of what is happening in the public system where discipline virtually doesn't exist. Now, there's a few things we've got to deal with here. Number one, the people who have been running and designing the school system for the past 10 years have to go. We have to go and look overseas and bring in somebody to be able to reform the system. When police corruption was a problem inside New South Wales, the then New South Wales government decided to go and find a police commissioner from outside the service. In fact, they went all the way to London to find somebody to end up running the New South Wales Police Service to be able to reinvent itself into a service that now does not resemble at all the worst of the 1980s and 90s. We need to search the world and give the maximum power to the people that are currently running things like the Singaporean school system or many of our Asian competitors and friends, because they do it right. In this country, we also need to stop kidding ourselves that money is going to equal better results. What about basic discipline in classrooms? Now, I say this as a kid who was an absolute failure at school. The TER, which was the mark when I went to school, I'm not proud of this, but I was in the 40s, which meant I failed year 12. Now, I was lucky that I had a certain ability that meant that I'm able to sit here in front of you today and I've been able to find a different path, but mine is obviously not the normal path. The reality is that our school system has too many teachers in it that want to play activist, have too many principals in it that obviously are waiting times out, and too many parents who are not involved in their kids' education. Now, I understand that in the modern era, people who are parents of my vintage, about Gen X and younger, we've become obsessed with extracurricular activities. The kids have got to go to swimming and dance and art and this and that and this and that, and they've got this thing before school and this thing after school. Well, the reality is they're not actually focused on school. It's our job as parents and grandparents to actually focus on our kids' education. Not always their mental health and their mental well-being and whether or not little Johnny or little Sally is having a good emotional time, but sometimes we've got to turn around and say, so what did you learn today at school? Show me what they taught you. If you don't have any documents, then okay, let's go back and let's try and replicate some of the lessons. If you've got a little kid, read to them. If some of the overwhelming parts of the modern school curriculum are a little much for you, try and learn yourself. Because we are in a serious problem right now. And while the education system is all good and well, for the teachers' unions who will not change how their system of performance works or school hours work, a generation of kids has been failed by the system. Now, there are bad kids, and yes, there are even dumb kids. But the reality that we have a system where teachers are burnt out because of all of the superfluous garbage that they have to do rather than just teach lessons, that needs to change. The people who are running the same education courses, which are producing the same teachers who are often only half a chapter ahead of the kids in textbooks, if at all, needs to change. But where was the urgency today? A third of Australian kids are falling behind in NAPLAN. A third. If a third of the people in aged care were receiving substandard treatment, we would have a Royal Commission. Oh, that's right, we did. If a third of the country was affected by anything that resulted in them failing basic standards, you'd hear from the Prime Minister. Instead, the best we got today was the Federal Education Minister. And the Federal Education Minister was sort of pretending, oh yeah, it's all okay. These are the same people who've pumped hundreds of billions of dollars into a school system that keeps failing kids. And premiers and politicians who every time an election comes around point at schools and pretend they're about education, but the reality is, at the first sign of trouble, they crumble. They never stand up to the teachers' unions, And these were the people who decided to yank our kids out of class for the best part of 2 years because of the bloody Wu flu. Here's Jason Clare, the Education Minister, today.
We need serious reform in education. I think this report makes that blisteringly clear. We now know that if you're below the minimum standard when you're in third grade, then chances are you're going to still be below the minimum standard when you're in year 9. Only 1 in 5 children who are below the minimum standard in primary school are above it by high school. And as a result, a lot of those children drop out and don't finish high school. And this is happening at a time where we need almost everybody to finish high school, because that's what you're going to need to get the jobs in the economy that lies ahead. You're going to need to finish high school and then go on to TAFE or uni.
How frightening was that? That his concern about kids failing in primary school was that they mightn't make it all the way to year 12 because everyone must finish year 12. Well, of course, there are plenty of people who don't need to finish year 12. They can leave in year 10, they can have vocational training, and they can become the tradies who end up earning hundreds of thousands of dollars more than any wanker who ends up going and doing an arts degree. These are about the priorities. When a report comes out like this today, it should have been the headline story of every news bulletin every hour. Instead, it didn't lead the news anywhere tonight at 6 p.m. around the country. The Prime Minister was allowed to get away with saying nothing. The Premiers made no appearance whatsoever. There should be an emergency meeting of National Cabinet tomorrow. This is our future. We talk all the time about the country that the kids want to inherit. We talk constantly about the future. We have people running off to courtrooms saying that we have to make decisions because of the future when it comes to the environment. Well, what about the future when it comes to education right now, today? Now, I said what I said last night about patriotism. I double down now about academic performance. Again, as a person who was not good at school, and I know how much my mum and dad love me and my nana and papa love me and were involved in my education. But all of us have to step up. Aunties, uncles, mums, dads, sisters, brothers, nana, papa. Whatever role you can play in knowing what your kids are up to, making sure that if it's an education you don't like because it's become too woke, pick up the phone and ring the principal. But more importantly, get involved. I know you love them. I love them too. But we've all got to step up. Because if the system continues to fail them, we are in for a massive world of trouble here in Australia. A little later tonight, I'm going to have a chat to Kevin Donnelly, of course, an education expert from the Australian Catholic University.
We've known about this for 19 years, and governments, bureaucrats, academics, teacher, training institutions have done nothing to turn it around.
Unbelievable.